All right, good morning. We're going to give it just another minute or two if people want to join. And we are all set up. If you can see my screen that says seasonal pests and diseases, if you could just click, hit a yes or send some reply in the chat, that would be awesome, just to make sure we're set up and ready to go. Awesome, thank you. Okay, we'll give it just about another minute. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. I know it's a beautiful morning outside and I'm dying to get out there. I might even plant a few plants myself. So we'll get through this. You can just get back to your day in just a little bit. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started because it is 11:02. My name is Emily Anderson. I'm the garden coordinator for the North Texas Food Bank. Again, thank you so much for joining me this morning on learning about pests and diseases in our gardens. If you don't know too much about the food bank, I am the garden coordinator there. So that means that I manage our partner garden program as well as our garden education like this. And I also manage our demo veggie garden that we have on the food bank site in Plano. So that's a little bit of what I do. But I love gardening. It's really fun. And I've learned so much about pests and diseases in the past couple of years since I really started gardening a whole lot. So just so y'all know, I will try to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A during the presentation. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A portion at any time. I'll have Q&A at the end. And then our chat, just feel free to put any comments or anything you have in the chat, but try to put questions in the Q&A if you don't mind, just so then I can look in one spot for those questions. And we will go ahead and get going. Make sure. Okay. So this topic of pests and diseases is very broad. I mean, you could spend a whole lot of time on this topic. But today I just was hoping to give you an overview of some common pests and diseases that you can find in your garden, particularly your vegetable garden, but a lot of what we're talking about can be in ornamental as well. So this is a lot of, preventative practices as well as control methods and also identifying pests and diseases in your garden. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the first thing we want to talk about is, decide what is a beneficial insect and what is a harmful insect. So a beneficial insect is going to prey on our harmful ones. Sometimes they prey on each other. They're predatory insects, but there's also harmful ones, and those are the ones that cause damage to our plants or the ones that we don't want in our garden. So for beneficial insects, you can actually buy a lot of them in bulk at nurseries, or you can also buy them online. Like I've bought some things on Amazon before. And these lists on here, particularly for the beneficial insects, this is not an extensive, list of all of the beneficial insects. Again, it's just going to be a lot of the common ones that you'll find. So our beneficial nematodes are one. These nematodes are worms that are microscopic. You can't see them without a microscope. They live in your soil, the good and the bad. And they are going to chomp down and help control your soil-borne pests. So that's going to include a lot of beetles, a lot of different like cutworms and grubs and things like that. You also have lacewings. Lacewings love eating your soft-bodied insects. So that's going to be your caterpillars and your aphids, among others. We also have ladybugs, which they also love to eat aphids. And the great thing about ladybugs is that the larval stage, or when they're like immature, and also when they're adults, both stages will feast on aphids. Aphids are their favorite snack. So if you see ladybugs in your garden, That is a good sign that your biological control is working just fine. Praying mantises, of course, are also really good. They will eat anything and everything that moves in their path. So they're not really going to be just targeting those harmful insects. But again, those are really good to have around as well. There's something called an assassin bug. And these like to attack aphids and large caterpillars, beetles, and flies. And we also have braconid wasps. And these wasps also are going to find soft-bodied insects, and they're going to lay their eggs in them. So that's a couple of beneficial ones that you can find. And then for the harmful ones, there's a long list of harmful insects. But really, there are two main categories of the harmful ones. So one of them is going to be a sucking insect. And this one's going to have a long straw-like mouthpiece called a proboscis. And it's going to stick it in a plant or maybe another insect. And it's going to, mainly plants, but they're going to suck out the nutrients and the water, but mostly the nutrients in those plants. And then you have chewing insects. And those are going to be your caterpillars, some beetles, and you can see the chomp marks. You can see them biting and eating your plants. So those pictures on the screen on the left, this is an assassin bug actually eating a fly. And you can actually see its mouth part stuck into the fly. So there's nature at its finest. And then on the right, we have a potato beetle that is actually chomping on my eggplant seedling. So those are just a few pictures of those insects, but we can dive a little bit more deeper. This right here is a picture of actually ladybug larvae. They don't look anything like the adults. So if you see anything like this in your garden, leave it. You want it to stay. That is going to turn into a ladybug. They look very interesting. When I first found out that this is an immature ladybug, I was surprised. But in this picture, if you're not familiar, these are aphids, every gardener's nemesis. They love new growth on any and all plants. And there are many different types of aphids. But all those little yellow dots are the aphids that those larvae are eating on that plant. Okay, and just a few more pictures of some beneficial insects. So on the left is actually a milkweed bug. And I included this as beneficial because some people do consider these insects beneficial because they can keep down the milkweed population, and milkweed can be invasive. So in this picture, the milkweed bugs are eating a type of aphid called an oleander aphid, and they love to stay on milkweed as well. So they're really there to eat the aphids. We have a lot of milkweed in Jan's garden, which is the garden at the food bank that I manage. And I saw a lot of these bugs, so I wanted to know what they were. So if you have milkweed and you see these bugs, they're not necessarily bad. Feel free to keep them around if you'd like to. In the middle picture, this is what beneficial nematodes look like before you apply them to your garden. So they actually look like a little yeast packet to me. And whenever I got mine, I got them from a local nursery in town, and I had to keep them refrigerated until I wanted to use them. Once I use them, I just put them in, I use just a gallon sprayer, and I mixed it with water, let it sit for a few minutes, and water is going to activate the nematodes. So once they were activated, I just sprayed the garden beds that I wanted nematodes in because I had a grub problem. And so they're really simple and easy to use. Nematodes are great, but that's what they look like before you apply them. And then on the right is a lacewing, who again, they like to eat those soft-bodied insects. This insect may not be super familiar to you, so I wanted to include a picture of that here. Okay, so this slide and the next one are very wordy, but just bear with me because we're not going to go over every single box in detail. But I did want to give you a list of some common insects. Again, this isn't all of them, but I wanted to kind of touch on some main points of some certain insects. So aphids, like we've mentioned before, if you are not familiar with them now, you will be after this workshop. But aphids are a sucking insect, and a lot of sucking insects can carry different diseases. I think some of them can carry a bacterial wilt, some of them can carry a mosaic virus. So even if you see one or two, go ahead and take them off your plant because you never quite know if they're going to be carrying a disease as well, and give that to your plant. So these aphids are going to be soft-bodied insects. They're going to have a pear-shaped body, and they come in a lot of different colors. So we're talking like yellow, brown, black, green, anything in between. They can come in that. Aphids are really easy. I don't want to say easy to get rid of, but there are multiple ways you can get rid of them. One of them being high-pressured water. You can use neem oil. You can rub them off with your fingers. They really love new growth and they love hiding on the underside of leaves. So if you think that you may have aphids, look on the underside of the leaf, and they also really like congregate there. There's going to be a lot of them. And another point about aphids, they leave behind something called honeydew. So once they've sucked out the nutrients in your plant or what they want, and their excrement is called honeydew because it's very sugary sweet and it leaves this kind of sticky, shiny residue on the leaves. And ants really like to eat that. So if you see ants on your plants, don't get too concerned, but you might want to look for signs of aphids on there. Leaf miners. Leaf miners are a chewing insect. They actually bore into the leaf tissue and will eat a path inside the leaf, and it's really noticeable. That's mainly cosmetic, but if you see damage from a leaf miner, go ahead and pull that leaf off of the plant. Grasshoppers, we're all really familiar with grasshoppers. Keep those grassy weeds down. That's gonna be one of the best things you can do to keep grasshoppers off of your plants. Squash vine borer. Okay, so this one I want to go into a little bit of detail on. Squash vine borer is a chewing insect. They do love to attack your squash plants, no surprise. But what happens is the adult is a moth, and the moth will go to the base of the plant, kind of around soil level, and they will lay their eggs there. When the eggs hatch, they are going to be larvae that are going to bore into the stem of the plant, which is going to cause rotting and death of your plant. And those larvae are going to be eating the plant tissue inside of the stem. When that happens, their excrement is called frass. So you're going to be able to see that frass, and that's how you're going to know you have squash vine borers. One of the ways you can know. Some people to get rid of these, they'll actually take a needle and poke through the lower areas of the stem to get to those larvae. Some people, for a preventative measure, they will tie foil around the base of the plant. They also will tie like stockings around the base of the plant as well, because those two things make it really difficult, or at least they make it harder for the squash vine borer to lay their eggs down at the base of the squash plant. So squash vine borer is really hard to get rid of once you have it, because they also overwinter in the soil. So this is when crop rotation is really important. If you see a couple squash vine borers like I did last year, I know I don't want to plant my squash there again, because I know that those little squash bugs are going to be in there, or the squash vine borers are going to be in the soil, just waiting for me to plant another round of squash there. The adult is really easy to identify, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a little bit. But squash vine borer, it's all about prevention for them. Once you have them, it's more about control. It's very difficult to eradicate them. So with squash vine borer, it's all about prevention. Tomato hornworm, of course, this is a worm, so any worms or caterpillars or chewing insects. This is a big guy. These tomato hornworms are big, but they camouflage really, really well in your tomato plants. So if you have tomatoes this year, just be sure to be on the lookout for them, every day or so. They have distinct markings on their bodies. We'll see a picture of that too in just a little bit. And they're really easy to hand pick off because they're pretty big. You just got to find them. Okay, so a cabbage worm, same thing. It is a chewing insect, and you can kind of tell they have green bodies, and they have certain markings on them as well. They'll leave behind their noticeable chew marks. So spider mites, thrips, and whiteflies, all of these are sucking insects, and they're all really small. Now, some of their damage may be cosmetic, and that's with all of these insects. It may just look bad. You may only have one or two insects. But if you get a lot, then there's a chance for really just killing your whole plant entirely. But spider mites, I want to put these on here because they're really easy to, they're really common to see. And spider mites, they're going to be a reddish brown, tiny, tiny little insect. You might see some webbing on the underside of some leaves. That's kind of telltale that you have spider mites. Be sure that you keep your plants watered, because they really like the drought-stressed plants, which is very easy to do down here in Texas. So make sure that you're watering properly to keep those away. Thrips are going to look like little black slivers on your plants. So if you're thinking, I might have thrips, or I don't know what's going on, one way to identify if you have them or not is to take a white piece of paper and take your plant and just kind of tap your plant over the white sheet of paper. If you see these black little slivers, then that's going to be your thrips. With whitefly, they are a different color. They're white, and you can tell if you have them by actually like swatting at your plant. And if you see all these little white fluffy things coming off of your plant, then that means that you have white fly. So if you shake the plant and they kind of come around and fly around, then that's, it's white fly. And then the last one we're all familiar with as well are slugs. And one good way to get rid of those is something called Sluggo. And just to make sure, I don't know if I said this at the beginning, but pretty much everything we're talking about today is organic. You can go into chemicals, but that's if you want to, or but today everything that we're going to be talking about is organic for your garden. Okay, so I want to just point out a few more harmful insects to you. We didn't talk about the cucumber beetle, but that on the left picture, that is a cucumber beetle. It's very distinct with its little round body. It's got a yellowish green body, and then it also has these black dots on it. Cabbage looper, this is a green caterpillar, and it has legs in the front and the back, and it makes that looping motion whenever it moves with its body. And lastly, that is what leaf miner damage looks like. So again, that's mainly cosmetic. If you want to, feel free to take those leaves off the plant. That's probably going to be your best idea to do. Okay, and cucumber beetles, for the record, and cabbage loopers too. They have, certain vegetable or produce words in their name, but they target much more than just cabbage and cucumbers. Okay, so I put two pictures of aphids in here to really show you that what they look like and how they kind of hide on the leaves. So on the left right there is an aphid, and that I think is a really good picture of the pear-shaped body. It's got 6 little tiny legs, but that body is really distinct. In the middle, that's what the aphids look like when they're all together underneath the leaves of the plants. And you can see there's different shapes and sizes. There's also different colors there. And so yeah, there's a lot of different things going on with aphids. Aphids also have a very fast life cycle. I think it's in a couple of weeks, you can have multiple generations in your garden. So that's one reason that insects are really difficult to get rid of. So keep an eye out for those, definitely, especially on new growth. And then on the far right, that is a squash vine borer. And you can see that it is a moth. It's got 2 black long wings. The upper body is black, and but there is some orange on there as well. So that orange and black combination is really distinct. Also, it has 2 really distinct antennae on the front. That's not a squash plant, but it is there. It's in my garden, or it's in Jan's garden last year. And what you see behind it, that's actually not frass. I want to be clear that that is not frass. It's actually a pellet of organic fertilizer that started to decompose or break down after I started watering, and it was just on the plant leaf. So that's not frass. That is just a piece of fertilizer. All right, so we're going to jump into integrated pest management now, or IPM. IPM was actually created by Texas A&M AgriLife Extension in 1972, and it is a very widely used practice, I think, like around the world. I mean, this is everything we're talking about, again, is organic, unless you choose to go into the insecticides or chemicals, which is completely up to you. So this far right picture here, I just want to mention that is a tomato hornworm, if you've never seen one. It's got really big legs and kind of fat legs, and it has those dots on there and those white stripes, and you can see on the tail end there's a little red horn. So that is a tomato hornworm right there. And before we dive into IPM is really about just keeping a healthy garden. It's all about control practices. So it's going to be using biological, cultural, and mechanical control. So we'll talk about all 3 of those and what that looks like. Okay, so cultural control. A lot of what's on the screen you probably already know and may even already do. So it's basically like good habits in the garden. So crop rotation, we talked about that earlier. You don't want to plant the same plants in the same spot every season, because you're going to deplete the soil of the same nutrients, as well as any insects that are overwintering in there. You're just going to feed right into their hands. So crop rotation is really important. There are varieties that are pest resistant or even disease resistant. And of course, you want to keep your weeds down and water properly. Same with fertilizer. You want to make sure that you use that properly and fertilize at the right times. If you need to, leave your garden fallow for a time. If you know that you have some insects that are some problems in some beds, just leave it for a couple of seasons, or maybe just one season, and try it again later and kind of let that bed rest. Of course, removing piles of dead or diseased plants. If your plants are diseased, be sure that you're not composting them. Make sure you're throwing them away. Sanitize your garden tools. So rubbing alcohol is just fine if you are using your tools on something that you know is infected. Rose rosette is a good example. You have to really sanitize your tools after cutting or pruning rose rosette or plants with rose rosette, because that pathogen will stay on your pruners and just be transferred to the next plant that you go to. So be sure that you maybe just have some rubbing alcohol and a cotton ball on hand and just wipe your tools as you go if needed. Of course, select healthy plants and pest-resistant varieties. You also want to make sure that you are preparing your soil correctly and scouting your garden regularly. I was in the landscaping industry before I came into vegetable gardening at the food bank, and scouting your garden is so important. I really do believe, and I experienced that so much in landscaping, just going to gardens often and checking things helps you really catch detrimental problems before they become really big. So scouting, I'm a firm believer in scouting. So let's talk a little bit more about that. If you're not sure what I mean by scouting, I just mean going to your garden and looking around pretty frequently, like maybe every other day or a couple times a week. Just going and looking in your garden, looking for signs of pests or diseases. And something that you can do while you're scouting is taking a jar or a cup of water and just adding some Dawn dish soap to it and kind of swirling it around and get it a little sudsy. And that's what's happening in this picture here. I used that and I was picking harlequin bugs, which is what is in that jar, off of, I believe it was brassicas, like late spring, maybe early summer last year. I think it was around late April or May. And these harlequin bugs were all over me. Of course, I just had to rip them out. The season was over for them anyways. But so that's what I did is I just had soapy water and I would just drop those insects in there by hand because they're pretty big. So if insects are big, you can pick them off by hand pretty easily. You can also use duct tape. Now this is going to be for your insects that are smaller and probably a little more soft bodied, ones that are harder to pick off by hand. So I'm not saying to just adhere the duct tape to the leaf and leave it. But what you want to do is peel off a little piece of duct tape, gently adhere it to wherever the insects are, probably on the underside of the leaf is a good guess. And then you want to just gently pull it off and your insects will be stuck to the duct tape. So you can try it that way. You can also, like I've talked about, squish with your fingers. If you are in a hurry and you kind of just need to rub with your hands and your gloved hands around, that's fine too. And high pressured water will work as well for aphids and for a couple of other things as well. I think somebody mentioned whitefly or mealybug, how to get rid of it forever. That's a good question of how to get rid of it forever. I know we'll talk about neem oil, which is something that you can try if you haven't already. Spraying with high pressured water might kind of get, especially some of the mealybugs, you can spray that with high pressured water as well and just get it off the plant. And again, this does require diligence. So you're going to need to be a little bit disciplined. You're going to scout frequently, but it is definitely saves a lot of heartache in the future when you work so hard for your garden. Okay, so biological and mechanical controls. Biological, we've already talked about. This is where you have bugs prey on other bugs. And there are a few drawbacks to this. So of course, if you go online or go to a store and you bulk buy ladybugs, well, it's not guaranteed that whenever you release them in your garden that they're going to stay. I had a friend who did this because she had a grapevine in her backyard, a big grapevine. It was just covered with aphids. It did not look good. It was unhealthy. And so she put ladybugs back there, but they all flew away. So you can't keep them in your yard. And I'll show you a picture in just a minute of like biological control doing its thing, and like ladybugs eating aphids. So it can work. For some reason, those ladybugs didn't want to eat those aphids. I'm not sure why, but they didn't stay in the backyard. And then of course, some of the predatory insects that you buy, maybe they only target specific ones. And you have to decide, do I really want to pay and invest in all these extra insects when they may not even stay in my yard, or if they're only going to target certain ones. So again, that's just something that's up to you. And then mechanical control, this is using physical means in the garden to protect your plants. So we've talked about water. You can use covers or barriers. You can handpick pests from plants. I've heard that, covering your squash vines from squash vine borer can be helpful if you're planting them in a new area where they're not underneath the soil and overwintering there. So that's another option as well. So this picture right here is of a cucumber vine that I had last summer, and all these little red arrows are pointing to ladybugs. Most of those arrows are pointing to two ladybugs because they're mating. But this plant was riddled with aphids. There were so many aphids on it, which is probably why it doesn't look too great in this picture. But the ladybugs are doing their work. You can also see, I want to point out a few things in this picture. So kind of on the left side of the picture, you can see, and it's kind of towards the bottom, there's a leaf with leaf miner damage. And you can see it's really distinct. It's a lighter colored path on the leaf. That's what leaf miner damage will look like. So another example there. And then there's a leaf in the middle that looks pretty yellow. And it looks really yellow in between the veins. So it has some interveinal chlorosis. It looks kind of mottled. The colors are kind of change on the leaf, and it looks raised. It looks kind of blistered. So that could be a sign of mosaic virus. And I think aphids are vectors for that, but I know they're vectors for other diseases as well, for sure. But that's just something to look at as well, that maybe there are more than one thing. There's more than one thing going on with my cucumber plants last summer, but they did produce some, so that was nice. Okay, general use products. These are some things that you might just want to have on hand to fight your pests. You know, some things, some insects, you know, you may find that you might want to use a certain product that targets specifically that pest. But these are good things to have on hand in the interim if you decide you need to get, you know, a specific product for something. So in this picture is neem oil and BT. So neem oil is, it's from the neem tree. They get oil from the neem tree in India, and it targets a lot of pests. So that's a good one to have on hand. Both of these, and also insecticidal soap on this list, you just mix it with water and you can just spray your plants. For BT, that's going to be on the right. So BT is actually a natural microbe found in the soil. And there are multiple strains that you can purchase, and they target different insects. This one that I believe I have, I think it's a fairly, it controls moth larvae, so it controls caterpillars. So this one is specifically good for that. So you can go on the market and look at different strains of BT. It is organic and it's great to use. For orange oil and Dawn, I use that for actually fire ants in my garden. I have had to, whenever I've used it, again, you just mix it with water. I just mix it in a gallon sprayer. For this one, I actually disturb the piles and then I spray them while they're out. And you can see it acting like immediately whenever you spray it on the ants. I have had to spray piles multiple times with this mixture, but I mean, for me, it's worked. I've really enjoyed it, and it's really gotten rid of some of the piles really well. So orange oil and Dawn and water, that's something you can use for fire ants. And a lot of the fire ants I have are inside my vegetable bed, so I want to be sure that whatever I use, since it's directly next to a plant, I want to make sure that it's very safe. Sluggo, that's an organic product you can use for slugs and snails. Diatomaceous earth. Okay, so it also goes by DE. DE is really interesting. It actually is, I want to make sure that I say the right thing. Let me look at my notes real quick. So it's made from diatoms, which are fossilized aquatic plants, actually. And DE, it comes in a powder, and it's very safe to use around people, around pets, around edible plants. But whenever it's being applied, it can really kick up and get in your lungs and your nose if you when you're applying it. So it's best to use a dust mask when you're applying it. But other than that, it's perfectly safe. It just may irritate you for a little bit, but then it'll die down and it's all good. DE, it is important to note that you need to get the food grade DE because there are other DE, there's another type of DE used for, I believe it's pool maintenance. So make sure you get the food grade one, and you can apply this in multiple ways. So you can just sprinkle it on your plants. You can put it in a thick band around your plants, because when insects come in contact with DE, DE has really sharp edges on it. And so whenever insects walk over it or come in contact with it, it rips up and tears their bodies up, and it helps dehydrate the insects. So DE can be really, really helpful. Do reapply it after a hard rain. You may need to even reapply it after irrigation, but you can either sprinkle it on your plant or put it on in a thick band around your plant to protect it, because that'll kill the insects as they walk over it. Okay, so insecticidal soap, that's another product that will target a wide array of insects as well. And I also just want to reiterate, follow label instructions. I'm sure all of you know this, but even with organic products, you can still burn your plants. So, with chemicals, it's much easier to burn your plants, but even with organic, it still can be pretty easy to do. So whenever you're applying any kind of fertilizer or any kind of, treatment for pests or diseases, be sure that you do it either on a cloudy day with cooler or mild temperatures. You do it in the morning, that's always best. And try to do it on a day with little to no wind. That is really important to reduce drift. So all of those would be better times to apply these. All right, so here is an insecticidal soap recipe that you can make at home. There are a couple different varieties out there. So, if you don't want to do this one, you can Google one and find another one. It's just water and dish soap. Do make sure that whenever you use the dish soap, you want it to have no added fragrances, no degreasers, no hand moisturizers. You want it to be just pure hand soap. And then if you want to, you can add, for a little extra kick to those insects, you can add vinegar or hot peppers or garlic to your insecticidal soap. So really, you don't need a whole lot. It's 1 tablespoon of soap per quart of water. You can use as many optional ingredients as you want. Just be mindful that the recipes I saw online said 1 teaspoon of these optional ingredients per gallon. So if you're going to go down to a quart, that's really not a lot of vinegar or hot peppers or garlic. But again, go ahead and do what you want. It is best to use these solutions sooner instead of leaving them for months. They're not going to keep for a super long time. So be sure to use them within a couple days time whenever you do mix them. Okay, so we're going to move on to plant diseases. This picture right here is a tomato from my garden last year called, and what it has is blossom end rot. This is a tomato, of course. If you have plants that have blossom end rot, you can cut off the infected part of the plant or the part that is rotten and eat the rest of it if you want to. So blossom end rot, I put this picture on here because that is actually not a pathogen. Blossom end rot, it happens from a calcium deficiency as well as infrequent watering. So I didn't keep the moisture level correct the whole season. It fluctuated too much and they kind of dried out and they got blossom end rot. Blossom end rot is also common for eggplant and peppers and squash and melons. So there's a wide variety of plants that can get it. But this is what it looks like. And it looks like a disease, but it's not. So this is where diseases get pretty tricky. The symptoms of diseases can oftentimes mimic a nutrient deficiency and vice versa. Pathogens, oftentimes, you can't see them with the naked eye. So it can be hard to diagnose. A lot of pathogens have the same symptoms. So this can get really tricky to figure out what's wrong with my plant, what exactly has it, or what does it have. And this is where AgriLife Extension can really come in handy because you can send samples of infected plant to them. They'll test it in their lab, and then they'll send you back a report of what exactly is going on, what is the pathogen or what's the root cause of the issue, and how to treat it or prevent it. So they really help you out with that because they can take it to their lab and research it all. So plant diseases, it's really important to know how plant diseases travel around and how they get from plant to plant. Many diseases are spread through water. So whenever you're watering your plants, you want to make sure you only water the root system and at the soil level as best as you can. If you're going to water and, some plants are hard to get just the roots that are moist, or maybe you have pop-up sprayers like I do in my garden, be sure that you are either watering early in the morning, which is really the best time. If you need to, water in the afternoon, but make sure that you let those leaves dry, give them time to dry before nightfall or before temperatures go down in the evening. Like right now is the perfect time for fungal diseases and all different kinds of plant diseases, really, because the temperatures at night will fall and it'll also be a little bit cool. So really for plant diseases, the temperature range for them to really grow and produce is between like the 40s and 80s, like 40 and 80 degrees. So that's a really wide range that we're often in the spring and fall in Texas, and for a very long time this year, actually. But that's a huge range of when those pathogens can really like spike and damage your plants. So it's best to try to water only the root system or early in the morning or in the afternoon. And then moist conditions with cold temperatures like we're talking about are the best environment for these diseases. And there are 4 main types of diseases for plants. So we have viruses, and those are going to spread a lot of the times through insects, particularly through sucking insects, but they can also transmit through chewing insects. And then there's bacteria. Again, that spreads through splashing water. And then there are nematodes. So we talked about beneficial nematodes. There are also bad nematodes. And those are going to be in your soil and they're going to feed on your root system. And then there's fungus. So these spores can spread through wind, water, equipment. I mean, you name it, they can spread in that way. So again, a lot of mild moist conditions for all of these diseases. And again, with viruses, there is no cure. That's all about prevention with viruses. So be sure that, if you have a bed or if you have a plant that has a virus, be sure to really take precaution for next season. Okay, so symptoms of disease. So this picture is from Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. I think it does a really good job illustrating some of the issues that can happen with, or some of the symptoms that plants can show for a plant disease. So of course, wilting of leaves, we're all familiar with that. The tricky thing with that is it can be a disease or it can be that your plant is thirsty. There's root rot or root knots. So root rot is what it sounds like, the root's gonna rot. But then with root knots, you're gonna have these kind of knot looking growths in your roots. So root knots, that's really common for vegetable plants if you have those. So just be mindful of that. There are also galls that can show up on your plants. A gall is going to be an outgrowth or an overgrowth of tissue somewhere on your plant. So in this picture, it's at the stem, the base of the plant. That's crown gall. So again, that's just going to be, you have your stem, and then you're going to have an outgrowth on that stem of plant tissue. Leaf spots, that's just where your leaf has some spots on it, individual spots. Leaf blight is where your whole entire leaf is just sick and necrotic. Fruit rot, I showed that to you, blossom end rot in the tomato. And then there's also cankers. Cankers are going to be sunken lesions on your stem, or it doesn't even have to be on your stem, but it's going to be somewhere on the plant. And it's going to be a sunken lesion, and oftentimes it can be oozing something, some kind of liquid. So a gall is an overgrowth of plant tissue, and then a canker is going to be a sunken lesion, and it's going to kind of look like a wet water spot and oftentimes oozing something. That's definitely a sign that something is going wrong. Okay, prevention and control practices. A lot of these we've already talked about because it helps with pest management, it's involved with IPM, it's just involved with having a healthy garden. So again, fertilizing properly, watering properly, making sure that you're watering just the soil or the roots of the plant, not the foliage, if you can do that. There are disease-resistant varieties for some plants, and again, crop rotation. We've talked about that as well. Overcrowding is definitely something you want to avoid. I mean, people, we like our own space, right? Plants do too. They need that space because if you overcrowd, it's going to be a stagnant environment in between the plants. The conditions will probably stay moist because there's not much airflow through there. So it's stagnant, it's moist. It's just a great environment for diseases. So be sure that you thin your plants properly and space them out as needed. And then, I've also recently, whenever I've had to thin out my plants, I'll just transplant, depending on what the crop is. I will take it and I'll transplant it to another part of the garden instead of just throwing away the little transplants or the thinnings. Let's see, copper and sulfur containing products you can use on bacteria, fungi, and viruses. This is like a Bordeaux mixture. So if you've ever heard of that, that can help with that as well. And then for nematodes, the best way to get rid of your bad nematodes is to warm up that soil. So you can put black plastic over your whatever part of your garden where you had nematodes and leave it there for 6 to 8 weeks during the summer. So the best way for that is to kill them with heat. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what diseases can look like. On the right, or excuse me, on the left right here is stem blight. And again, this is a fungus that can occur on cucurbits. So that's melon, squash, gourds, and cucumbers. And the stem is going to have that necrotic area and kind of like a canker, and it's going to ooze a liquid. And then right here, these are leaf spots. Leaf spots can grow to, kind of conglomerate and come into one big spot, but generally they're just going to be individual spots, and that pops up with little air circulation. And then on the right is powdery mildew, which is very common. This can just be cosmetic, but it can also be harmful to your plants. So it's going to look a little bit a little fuzzy. And again, that's high humidity and moderate temperatures. So they really enjoy those kind of conditions. And then there's also in the middle, this is mosaic virus. There's a couple different types of mosaic virus. There's cucumber mosaic virus and a few others. But the modeling of the colors in the leaves is going to be a very important indicator that you probably have a mosaic virus. So it's going to be anything from dark green to light green to yellow or white. The leaves are going to change colors. And there's also going to be a blistering effect on, or what looks like to be blistering, because it's going to be raised on the leaves, kind of like that last picture I showed you with the cucumbers. It's going to look raised. It's just not going to look healthy. It's going to look a little puckered in places. So that could be a sign of mosaic virus. And mosaic virus is also, it's transmitted through aphids and I believe leafhoppers and even cucumber beetles. So again, just be careful of those, of all harmful insects, because they're vectors for diseases sometimes. And then nematodes. So on the right, those two arrows are pointing to root knots. So root knot nematodes are going to be really common in your edible plants, as I talked about earlier. With nematodes, it's underneath the soil. So if you think you have a nematode problem, it can get a little tricky, because you can either pull your plant out and check out the roots. That's really the only way that you can see those root knots. So nematodes can just get tricky, because to check it, you have to pull your whole plant out. And the signs are the symptoms for what looks like nematodes may be for something else. So overall, really, to wrap this up, pest and disease prevention is really important. It all kind of goes hand in hand. We're talking about using integrated pest management, those mechanical, biological, and cultural control practices in your garden. We're talking about scouting for insects pretty often. Again, I can't reiterate enough. I think that's so important to catch things early before it really just wreaks havoc on your whole garden, whatever it is. Of course, read labels and instructions. If you need to, dilute a solution a little bit for fertilizing or for using some kind of pest or disease management. Again, we talked about great products to have on hand, and I did mention contacting Texas A&M AgriLife Extension for questions. They do have an entomology office, and they also have a plant pathology lab. They're right up here on Coit Road, so really sending things to them will be pretty easy. They do have on their website, or you can just Google like Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Plant Pathology Lab or Entomology Lab, and they will you'll find directions on how to send things to them, and they'll get the reports back to you. So if you really have a problem, reach out to them as well. And even like the master gardeners in the area, I think they can come out and also consult with you. So that could be something to do as well. And that is going to wrap up our pest and disease workshop for today. If y'all are interested in coming out and helping with Jan's Garden, on the left, that is a picture of our Jan's Garden website page. That's where you can sign up for our next workshop, which is actually Thursday, April 15th at 6:30 p.m. next month. You can also find garden videos there for tips and tricks and how-tos and DIY. And we also have handouts for, composting 101, or how do you prepare your garden for spring and fall? What are some things you need to know about that? So there's a lot of kind of like 101 how-to garden tips on that page. And then the other page on this slide is the Partner Garden. So that is a program that I manage at the food bank. And if you or someone else you know is involved with the garden at in your community, and you want to donate it to one of our partner agencies with the food bank, you can partner with us and help feed our hungry neighbors. So you can go to our webpage there and check out more information about that. And then lastly, if you want to get involved by volunteering with the garden specifically, we are looking for a garden kernel, which is a weekly volunteer to help with our garden maintenance, anything from harvesting to planting to weeding and everything in between. Right now we meet at on Tuesdays from 9 to 11 a.m. so we can get our harvest to the food bank, or to the food pantry, I should say, that we donate to. And then we're also looking for a teaching assistant kernel. So this is somebody who would help with elementary school in-person programming whenever we get around to that. And this would be more classroom management, there's really not any prep required for the assistant. But it may require a little bit of traveling around in the area on maybe some weekdays or weekends. So if you're interested in either of those, please email garden@ntfb.org. And lastly, I just want to thank you all so much for spending some time with me this morning, learning about pests and diseases. I hope you learned a few extra tips and tricks, and just thank you all so much for joining me. If you don't mind, whenever you click out of the presentation, there will be a survey that pops up. It'll just be very short and quick. It's actually going to be on the Zoom page whenever you leave in the browser. So it's not for Zoom, it's for this workshop. So if you don't mind taking a minute to do that, that would be awesome. And I'm going to check out the Q&A and also the chat, and we will, and I'll answer some of those questions. So if you need to hop off before Q&A, feel free to do so. Thank you all so much for joining us. Okay, orange oil and Dawn. So I'm seeing somebody asking how much orange oil and how much Dawn to use for our our fire ant spray. It is on my board at work. Let me see. I think one of them, I'm seeing if I have the picture on my phone really fast. It's not going to be a lot of each. I think it's maybe a couple of tablespoons of both. Let's see here. And with things like that, oh, here we go. Okay, so your fire ant spray, or fire ant juice as I call it, is 1.5 ounces of orange oil, 3 ounces of Dawn dish soap to 1 gallon of water. So that's 1.5 ounces of orange oil, 3 ounces of Dawn dish soap to 1 gallon of water. And I love using it too because, you know, if it gets on you, it's like, oh, you smell nice and clean. But you can also find orange oil, just like plain orange oil, at nurseries around town. You can also just buy it online. It's probably the cheapest and easiest way to do it. Okay, how long are the adult squash borer moths around and what size are they? That is a really good question. So the moths themselves, I would say they're 3/4 of an inch, maybe even an inch. They're pretty big and they're hard to catch. I've tried. I've caught 1 or 2 of them before, but they're pretty hard. So that's about how big they are. Maybe about like maybe the size, the width of your pinky finger thereabout. And how long are the moths around? I think the moths were around, gosh, for, I want to say maybe a month or 2. I could be wrong. But again, you know, if you have a couple of different squash vine borers around, you might have them for longer because of, you know, okay, this one hatched its eggs and now they're larvae and now they're moths. Okay, then this one hatched. You know what I mean? So how long, I don't remember how long squash vine borers are, how long the adults live for. But I want to say, I think it's about like maybe about a month or so, but I'm not 100% sure, but I can get back to you on that. Okay, let's see. How to destroy millibug. Okay, so whitefly, we're talking about whitefly forever. You know, with whitefly forever, that is always the question, right? How do I get this forever? How do I eradicate it out of my garden? For whitefly, let me see. I'm gonna scroll back to mine because off the top of my head, I'm not sure. Let's see. For whitefly, notes are bigger on the screen, so I'm looking over here. So yeah, you can use high pressured water, and you can use insecticidal soap. So that may be more for control, but eradicating forever, that's really not a possible thing. I hate to tell you that, but a lot of these insects, if they're gone one season, they're probably going to come back the next. I've already seen cucumber beetle in my garden. They're the last things I saw last year before winter, and they were the first things I saw after the snow in February. Like 2 days after the snow, I saw them. I don't understand. Powdery mildew, how to prevent. Yeah, so to prevent the powdery millibug, if you're talking about a different insect than the whitefly, powdery millibug you can get rid of also with high pressured water as well, because those things, they'll stay attached to it, but you can really get it off with high pressured water. Neem oil you can try for both of these as well. I would definitely try neem oil. You can try even different insecticidal soaps as well for mealybug, so, and for whitefly. So I hope that helped. If not, feel free to put another question into the chat. How to get rid of white grubs. So white grubs, for my garden, I use nematodes. I use beneficial nematodes. And I actually got mine, if you're in the Dallas area, I got mine from North Haven Gardens. They do sell them. And yeah, I just sprayed them on a cloudy morning, a pretty mild cloudy morning. And I think you apply them in the spring and you can apply them in the fall. And yeah, I just put it in a gallon of water and just sprayed all over all my beds. And you want to make sure it's cloudy and mild because they need time the nematodes are in the water and they need time to get down into the soil. And if it's really sunny outside, they're probably going to dry up and not be able to get down to the soil very quickly. So definitely beneficial nematodes for white grubs for sure. Okay, what is insecticidal soap and is there a brand you recommend? Is it like Dr. Bronner's or Castile soap? So for insecticidal soap, I like to use Safer brand, and I'm going to move this. Let's see, going the wrong way. Put it on here. There it is. So that neem oil is Safer brand, and that's what I like to use for insecticidal soap as well. Insecticidal soap, I think insecticidal soap has a surfactant in it, which a surfactant is something that helps the spray stick to the leaves. But when things have a surfactant, be careful because that can really burn your plants. Dawn, for this insecticidal soap, Dawn kind of acts as a surfactant. It kind of sticks to the leaves. Dawn is not as harsh maybe as maybe an insecticidal soap. Again, they're both organic, or considered organic, but I like to use Safer brand. I've used it before and it works really well. And it's really just, insecticidal soap is just, how do I explain it? It's basically just that surfactant and something, I don't remember what exactly is in there, but it will like adhere to the leaf and stick on there. Or like, so whatever bugs crawl on there and get in there will stay, instead of just completely drip off. So I'm not really sure. I'm not sure what Dr. Bronner's or Castile soap is, if I'm saying that correctly. But insecticidal soap is just an overall, it can treat a lot of insects. It's similar, I think, to neem oil, but neem oil is mainly just the neem oil or the oil from the neem tree. But they're both, I hope this is kind of answering your question, but they'll both attack a wide variety of insects. I think I've hit all the questions so far. If anybody else has any more, feel free to put it in the chat in the next minute or so. And it's also important to, if you're trying insecticidal soap, whatever it is, insecticidal soap or any other kind of pest control or any kind of spray you're putting on your plants, it is really good to test it on just a small part of your plant first. That way, if your plant reacts in a funky way, or it kills your plant or something like that, then you only applied it to a small part of your plant and not the whole thing. So that can be really good as well. And then, in a couple of days or so, you'll be able to tell, okay, it's reacting well, or it didn't react at all. That's good. So I'm going to go ahead and spray the whole plant. And a lot of these things too, you need to spray you have to read the label, but sometimes it's every 1 to 2 weeks, or maybe every 7 to 10 days. So be sure to check that out and look at that as well. It does get hard to spray everything in the summer at the right times because sometimes you might be spraying different things on different plants. And as we all know, down here in Texas, summer gets hot very quickly. Sometimes it's 95 at 6 a.m. So finding a time to spray can be really difficult. But again, if you water at night or if you decide to spray your plants in the evening, it's much safer to do that in dead of summer because the temperatures for fungal diseases and things aren't in that 40s to 80s range. We're kind of out of that in dead of summer. So, or we generally are. So you can apply things later in the evening or even at night if you want to, and they should be fine. Do I have a trick to spray the underside of leaves? Not really. That is, sometimes if your plant is a little bit woody, or if it's kind of flexible without breaking it, I can kind of just like pull it over to the side a little bit and spray as the leaves are kind of, more to the underside of the leaf is more on the top side. So I move my plants a little bit. I might just take the leaf and just spray it like crazy. If I see that there's a few leaves, especially that are really infected or leaves that have a lot of pests on them, I'll just take my fingers. I'll either pull off those few leaves or I'll take my fingers with gloves on them and just rub my fingers on there and just squish all the bugs at one time. So that's something else that I would do. But no, spraying under the underside of leaves is tricky, especially when you have a squirt bottle and if it's not full all the way, because it won't like spray the spray out onto the leaf. It gets tricky, but I don't really have a great trick for you. But I do kind of like try to just bend my plants just a little bit and kind of try to get underneath the leaf. Sometimes you just have to do it like, not all of them one by one, but sometimes I will do it, a few of them individually. And if you need to, like you can still spray the tops of the plants if you want, that's better than none. But if a lot of the pests are under there, you really want to contact them with that. Is it only for summer? So somebody asked if it's only for summer, and I believe I saw this question come in whenever we were talking about spraying plants in the evening or watering them in the evening. So watering in the evening and spraying your plants in the evening, both are really good for summer. In summer also, it's really good to water in the morning, or you can spray in the morning. Sometimes the sun just rises so fast and so early, and it's like by the time I get out there, it's already 95, heat index of 100, and full sun. So I really don't want to spray my plants then because you can burn them with organic things. I actually just did that the other day with fish emulsions. I did not shake it up enough. And there were some bits in the fish emulsion that stayed on my plants and just totally wrecked them. They were tomato plants. However, they came back out. The new growth is gorgeous. So I've had to wait 2 or 3 weeks, but they're bouncing back. So if you do burn some things, they may not be dead all the way. You may have just burned the leaves that are already on the plant. So give it some time before you completely throw away your plants and start new. But is it only for summer? Yes. And you don't want to spray in the middle of the day, except for in the winter, we don't really have pest and disease problems as much. But really, if you spray in the middle of the day, it might be like early spring, late or fall, or maybe even like late winter when temperatures are mild. And again, we have more overcast days. So hopefully that answered that question. If the guava flower before coming the fruits down, what to do? Okay, I'm reading this question. It's not making a whole lot of sense. So if you can retype it, that would be awesome. Guava flowers. I'm not super familiar with those, but go ahead and retype the question if you don't mind, and I will get to that. Okay, yes. Can I show the 1-page slide again? Yeah, showing both harmful and beneficial insects at the very beginning. I definitely can do that. Let's see. I think you were talking about this one. So North Haven Gardens here in Dallas has a really good list. AgriLife Extension, you can find a good list. Just Googling it, the list of beneficial and harmful insects will stay pretty much the same wherever you are. So you can Google that and that'll be good too. Oh, how to prevent the guava flower fall before the fruit comes. That is a really good question. That's interesting that the flowers are falling before the fruit actually forms. You know what, I am not too sure about that, but what I can do is I can look up how to prevent the guava flower fall. And in the follow-up email that I send in this for the recording and for any other questions I didn't answer, I will answer this one in that email. So be on the lookout for that next week. And I'll be sure to answer your email, and I'll make a note of that as well, because that's a good question about preventing guava flower fall. Does anybody else have any more questions? So again, with your harmful insects, one thing that I didn't mention is it's good to know the difference between sucking and chewing insects, because if you see, oh, I have an insect problem, and you see chomp marks, if you see that things are clearly bit by some kind of insect, that already rules out a huge portion of insects already. You can know that you can just stick to your chewing insects and look at that list specifically. Again, like if you see that there's damage and you know it's an insect, but there's no chew marks, well, then it's sucking. So vice versa. So it's really good to be able to narrow down your search and how do I want to, what do I want to do from here? What control practices do I want to use? And it's also really beneficial as well to know the life cycles of your insects that are problematic in your garden. Because some sprays or some treatments will work better if you attack the insect in the larval stage instead of the adult stage, or it might be the instar stage. That's a different one. So if you know your insect life cycle generally when that happens throughout the year, that can be really helpful as well, as far as, okay, when do I apply things? When will it be most detrimental to that insect? When will that spray be the biggest bang for its buck? So that can kind of help with that as well, knowing that. Kat, thank you so much for your kind words. That's really sweet. And again, I will get back to the question about in the follow-up email about the guava flower fall. And do I know how to sharpen garden tools? Somebody asked this question. Yes, and it's escaping me right now. So you can sharpen your garden tools like pruners and stuff with it's a diamond something. I'm totally blanking on what it's called. But if you have like a knife sharpener set and that like sharpening tool that's in there, you can use that to sharpen your tools. Oh man, the word diamond is in there. And I can do that as well in the follow-up email, because I'm blanking on the name right now. So I can follow up with that as well for you on how to sharpen your tools, because that is a really good question. But yeah, if you have a knife sharpener set, then you can definitely use that in there as well in the time being. But again, in the follow-up email, these questions I didn't get to, I will answer them in that email. And the recording, this is being recorded, and this will be posted about next week, and it's on our North Texas Food Bank YouTube page, but I will send out a link to all of you directly to that. So. And again, I will also check on the whitefly issue that people are having in their gardens. A lot of these pests, again, y'all, it's hard to completely eradicate these pests because they are going to just come and go. Sometimes they come and they don't actually go, or it takes a lot of work to do that. But I hope that this at least gives you, some foundation of what to go off of and some background information and basics on what to look for, how to identify some things, especially with the insects. Is it chewing? Is it a sucking insect? Those plant diseases can get really tricky, but you really minimize the amount of, you minimize the chance of plant damage and plant diseases if you just, fertilize correctly, water correctly, space your plants out correctly as well, do all of that. So again, we'll send a follow-up email next week with the link and the answer to some of these questions. Thank you all so much for these questions. Some of them are challenging, so I appreciate that. And I'm not seeing any more questions, so we will go ahead and end our workshop. But thank you all again so much for the questions and for tuning in this morning. And I hope you were able to go out and enjoy this beautiful weather. So thank you all again. And we hopefully will see you next time on April 15th on Thursday or 17th at 6:30 p.m. So thank you all so much.